for this beautiful session. And inshallah, we will have not only a lecture, but also we hopefully can have a better understanding regarding what's really happening now in not only in the whole Palestine, but also the the war itself in media. About Hasbara, I think most of us already familiar with this terminology, usually translated as explanation. Hasbara has multifaceted and well adapted to the digital age. And Hasbara also has its roots in earlier concepts of propaganda, even censorship. And in this context, I think Hasbara also recognized the control of narrative as a potential weapon. Narrative as an element of rhetoric, and in politics, now the narratives also legitimate some perception and delegitimates others. That's why to understand more about how Israel entity operating their Hasbara agenda to the international levels, so I think we can directly invite, please welcome our distinguished keynote speaker, Professor Dr. Sami Al-Arian, who also noticed as the director of the Center for Islam and Global Affairs, or CIGA, at Istanbul Sahabatin Zaim University. Please welcome, Professor. Jazakallah khair for having us with for the time and for your concern to open our mind in terms of the dangers of Hasbara and the war in media. So please, we will give you the time, and you can perhaps give the explanation until I think about one hour from now.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you very much for the invitation. I want to thank the organizers of this event, very important event, particularly in Indonesia. I want to also thank Dr. Maimun Herawati for organizing this and for inviting me. The topic of today is the Hasbara, the meaning of Hasbara, and how it's been manipulated and manipulating the Palestinian issue, the Palestinian cause. But before we start discussing this, it's very important to understand the origin of the Palestinian cause, because for anything to manipulate a cause as historic as the Palestinian issue, and that goes far back into the late 19th century, it's important to understand the origins of this. Throughout history, there were two kinds of Jewish communities. There was what Jewish encyclopedia called the Jews of Islam, those Jewish communities that lived throughout the vast Islamic world, and those who lived in European societies and Christian societies, or the Jews of Christendom. The Jews of Islam did not, and this is again confirmed by documentation, and even the Jewish encyclopedia called it the golden age of the Jews, did not suffer the persecution and prosecution that they had to go through in Europe throughout the centuries. It wasn't the last time when they were expelled like Muslims from Andalusia in the 15th century. And many of them had actually to immigrate and settle in Muslim countries. Without going through much details on this, the emancipation in the Enlightenment era, when Jews felt that this persecution that stayed with them for centuries had ended, and that they could actually now get out of their ghettos and integrate in these European societies where opportunities would be afforded to them after they were denied everything within these societies where they were held within these ghettos. But they found out that this racism, this endemic racism that engulfed European societies was alive. Theodor Herzl, the founder of modern political Zionism, who was a journalist, Hungarian Austrian from Austria, and of Austrian origin and Hungarian origin, he found this out during the Dreyfus affair in France in 1894. And he concluded that Jews will never be able to be integrated in European societies, and therefore the only solution is the nation-state system, and he started advocating for Zionism. So Zionism started towards the end of the 19th century, but he died in 1904 thinking that this project had died, that it's not going to come alive. But this project actually was adopted by European colonial powers, in which they thought that this movement could actually serve colonial interests, in addition to the vibrancy at the time of the Zionist movement, which was determined to establish this by all means. Some of these means we know today as Hasbara. Now, I don't want to go through the whole history of the cause, because certainly this is going to take more than the time allowed here. But the point I'm trying to make is that this problem, the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, did not start thousands of years ago, as the Hasbara people would like us to believe, that this is an endemic problem that goes back thousands of years, that this is a land without a people, for people without a land that was promised by God to certain chosen people, and therefore the world must accept this as a fait accompli and comply. All these are part of Hasbara, and Hasbara is simply put, as the moderator has said, it's shaping the narrative. And what the Israeli propaganda machine, which uses Hasbara, tries to do is to try to selectively use certain historical, sometimes facts, sometimes half-truths, sometimes even fabrications, and try to shape a narrative in order to fit into this Zionist outlook on what the land and the people are. And to do that, they had to create myths. These myths would have to serve this Israeli narrative. So throughout the struggle, Palestinian struggle, and throughout the Zionist onslaught on Palestine, which started, as I said, in late 19th, early 20th century, but culminating after the British occupied Palestine in 1918, in 1917, 1918, and stayed for about 3 decades until the creation of the State of Israel in 1948. Throughout this period, Zionists basically took over the land, while the one of the myths of this conflict is that this is a land without a people, for people without a land. The truth of the matter is that Palestine was always populated with its own indigenous population. The number of Jews, which are the primary target of Zionism, which is the ingathering of Jews from all over the world into the land of Palestine, the number of Jews around the beginning of the century, about 100 years ago, they were less than 25,000. But throughout the mandate of the British mandate, that number rose to about 650,000. In other words, they had over 25, almost 22, 23 multiples times, because the British would allow this massive illegal immigration. But even with that, there was still a minority within the mandated Palestine, within the territory of Palestine. So this is one of the myths that the Hasbara people will try to create. Again, Hasbara is aiming towards manipulating public opinion and shaping the perception about the conflict, about the struggle, in a way that would favor this Israeli narrative. They just advance one-sided arguments, which, as I said, based on half-truths or selective uh, uh, arguments or facts, as well as emphasizing certain things which are irrelevant, and with a barrage of disinformation that combines it in order to create this narrative, and in order also to their purpose, their main purpose, is to impact Western public opinion. They don't care much about other public opinion because they know Palestinians understand their history, and they live their history and experiences, and therefore they know that's not important. Of course, if they can get beyond Western public opinion, that would be better. And for many years, they were able to penetrate, particularly because of their influence on major Western societies, which for a long time they were controlling the major media outlets around the world, whether these were networks, TV networks, whether they were major newspapers or news agencies, or even public means of disseminating information. The idea also of Hasbara is to whitewash Israeli crimes. We have seen this time and again. Whenever there is a conflict, there will always be a deflection point by which Israeli crimes would always find an exception, particularly when we talk about the adherence to international law and international standards and the laws of war. There is always an Israeli exception that would be given to whatever the crime that was committed. Case in point, this whole thing about human shields. We've heard this term before. In order to whitewash, in order to justify killing hundreds and sometimes thousands of civilians, they would always invoke that somehow these civilians were used by the enemy of Israel as human shield, without actually showing a single evidence, even though that term in international law is prohibited. It is not allowed for Israel or for any aggressive party for that matter to kill civilians because somehow there is a nefarious person hiding behind that, whether or not that was done on purpose. But nevertheless, the people who analyze this, the people who propagate this, who disseminate this, you don't really care much about what international law says. It's just a narrative, hoping that this narrative will become the dominant narrative. We've seen, for example, also the myth of Israel is defending itself, that Israel has the right to defend itself, even though international law says that occupying powers have no right to defend themselves. In fact, it is the people under occupation who have the right to resist occupation. Those who occupy other people's lands and try to control their lives and control them have no right to occupy them, and have no right to kill them, and have no right to defend against the resistance. This is international law. This is what law says. In fact, if you go back to the United Nations, many resolutions, there had been many resolutions in the past that affirm that the Palestinians have the right to resist. In fact, they have the right to resist militarily. This was confirmed back in the 60s, the 70s, and throughout have been confirmed every single year by the UN. There are actually over 900 resolutions from the UN, whether by the UN General Assembly or by the UN Security Council, in which these resolutions affirm Palestinian rights in one way or another. None of them, I repeat, have been implemented by the occupying power. So the job, the task of Hasbara is to make sure all these things are in the background, that always the Israeli narrative is front and center, that they are portrayed as victims, that they are portrayed as people who are trying to defend themselves. While in fact, if we go back and dig deep into the nature of Zionism and what Zionism is about, what is the nature of this movement, what is the nature of this ideology, what is the nature of the regime it has implemented, it has brought about uh, to become the state of Israel back in 1948, we'll find that this is farther from the truth. The Zionist ideology to start with and the Zionist state that it had created is nothing more than a settler, colonial, racist, supremacist, violent enterprise that it's trying to uproot the indigenous people of Palestine and replace them with Jewish communities from around the world. This is something that is no longer disputed. This is something that we could actually give a whole historical narrative, documented, and we could see that this Zionist movement has indeed implemented its program throughout its existence through all kinds of violent means, not starting even with 1948. Indeed, it started long before that. The Palestinian people, during the British Mandate, during the British occupation, and then followed by the Zionist occupation of Palestine, have been subjected to all kinds of violent actions, including murder, including kidnapping, including exile, dispossession, and now we could also see genocide. Ilan Pappé, the one that was referenced before, as well as many other historians, have shown the documents by which in 1948 there was an actual plan to depopulate the land of Palestine, at least the majority of it, from its Palestinian inhabitants. My parents were among these people who were violently uprooted along with my grandparents from Palestine. This is something that I have known and I have heard firsthand from those who have been the subject of this genocide, this ethnic cleansing at the time. Some died and some were exiled. So for them to deny this is simply, obviously, is an attempt to deflect and to also manipulate the larger public opinion, particularly in the West, as if these Jewish communities, they were living in Palestine, and somehow one day people woke up and they tried to purge or to do a Holocaust like Hitler did, which is obviously a false narrative. What happened in Europe is something that needs to be held accountable for those who did in Europe whatever they did to their Jewish communities, and not to punish the Palestinians. But this is another false narrative, because the Holocaust itself was never used as justification to take over the land of Palestine. In fact, the Zionist movement predated the Holocaust by decades, as I said, towards the end of the 19th, early 20th century, while the Holocaust itself happened around the middle of the century. So this was just another justification that was used, another myth that was used to justify what is being done to the Palestinians. There are many myths, but we can also take this myth in which they try to justify taking over the land, that the Palestinians sold their lands and therefore they deserve to be out since they had sold their lands. The fact of the matter is again, farther from the truth. Palestinians under British occupation didn't sell their lands. In fact, those few families who sold land to others, including the Jewish Agency, were very few and did not account for more than 1.5% to 2% of Palestine. And they were mostly absentee landlords. These were mostly families from Lebanon who were tax collectors for the Ottoman Empire, and they had sold a few 100,000 acres of land because they were absentee. They didn't want to lose their lands. The vast majority of the land that was given to the Jewish Agency, they came through different violent manipulating means, including, I would say, that the British would not collect taxes on Palestinian farmers. They would come a few years later with a large tax bill that the farmers couldn't pay. Then they would take that land violently, and then they would hand it over for those who would pay the taxes owed to them. It was a calculated way of taking the land from the farmers and handing it over to the Jewish agency by allaying or by putting these large tax bills. But even with all this, with the grants they got, with the selling of the lands, with the taking over violently, the area of the land that was under Israeli, or under, I should say, Jewish control on the eve of 1948 did not exceed 6.5% of the whole of Palestine. So to justify taking over by the end of 1948 war, almost 78.5%, while they started with 6.5%. And to say the Palestinians sold their land, obviously, is another myth that has been propagated by the Hasbara, propagated by this propaganda machine, propagated and promoted by those who would like to marginalize Palestinian suffering and struggle. Another myth that the Hasbara also would try to say, that the Arabs attacked Israel, that Israel was a very tiny victim to Arab aggression. There are 7 Arab armies that came in trying to finish off Israel. The fact of the matter is that the number of Jews who were under arms exceeded 60,000. They started with over 40,000 during the war. They exceeded 60,000. By the end of the war, there were 80,000, while the whole so-called 7 armies did not exceed 25 to 30,000. So they tried to minimize this effort, and keeping in mind that during the British, when the Palestinians saw the danger of this illegal immigration, they saw that their lands is being taken over inch by inch and meter by meter. They start organizing to resist this, but the British was so brutal that they would execute a Palestinian for owning a gun or owning even a bullet. They would be executed on the spot. Palestinians had to sell very precious things in order to own some means to protect themselves and to defend themselves. But of course, they were totally outgunned, out-organized, and certainly they did not have the means to do so. And when Arabs tried to intervene, there were so many conspiracies, Western conspiracies, in order to make sure that the Arabs would never have the means. The person who was leading the Arab army, for example, in the East, was a British general, General Globe. I mean, just imagine where Britain occupied Palestine, and the person who was supposed to stop the aggression of the Israelis is also a British. On the Egyptian side, they never had the numbers and never had the weapons to do anything. So this is another myth that they tried to propagate, that somehow Israel was a victim of Arab aggression, while in fact it was the other way around. The war did not start in May 1948, certainly started long before that. And as I said, this has been amply documented. And as the book, The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine by Ilan Pappé would point out, that this was a very elaborate plan with the aim of trying to depopulate Palestine and try to exile and dispossess as many Palestinians in those areas as possible. Another myth that they try to propagate is that what happened in 1948, again, this is all part of the Hasbara propaganda machine, that the Jews in the Arab world were exchanged for the Palestinians. In other words, there were Jews throughout the Arab world. They came to Palestine to live under Jewish sovereignty, and the Palestinians left Palestine at their own volition. Nobody forced them to leave. It was them who left, and therefore we just exchanged populations. So what is the big deal? And of course, that's farther from the truth. Another lie, another fabrication, another made-up narrative that when you scrutinize it, when you look at the facts, it falls completely on its own because it's just not factual. In fact, it was Israeli organs within the state that were going to different Arab communities, particularly Iraq, Egypt, other places, and try to provoke, incite, even sometimes kill certain Jews in order to compel them to leave the state. And this has also been amply documented. There is a very famous affair called the Levin affair, in which they were trying to uh, uh, instigate certain incidents in Egypt in order to force Egyptian Jews also to leave. So there are so many lies and so many myths, but that's the whole purpose of Hasbara, is try to camouflage, is try to cover the real story and try to bring another narrative that would align with the strategic objective of the state of Israel. And in this case, the narrative of the state is that they need to legitimize the Zionist enterprise, that they need to legitimize the dispossession of the Palestinians, the true owners and inhabitants of the land, that they need to legitimize the violence that has been wreaked on them. Let's remember that none of these Israeli wars, with very few exceptions, which I would discuss, were even initiated by the other. It was always the Israelis who would initiate these wars, because they have this military doctrine that the only way they can establish this state and establish deterrence and establish this image of invincibility is to make sure that they can win these wars, and they can establish their control and authority in the land of Palestine throughout the struggle, bit by bit, gradually creating facts on the ground, trying to digest them, and then move forward. And that's what happened. But that's not the narrative you would hear. And of course, there is always this narrative that if you try to criticize Israeli policy, then you are quote unquote anti-Semitic. Again, this is a false narrative, because it's trying to falsely equate being anti-Zionist with being anti-Jewish. The whole notion of being anti-Semitic is that there is an irrational hatred or hostility, or the irrational hatred, hostility, and maybe even violence against Jewish persons. And therefore, when you equate Zionism or the criticism of Israel with that, then you are trying to lump these people in a way that they would be called anti-Semitic, and therefore you can marginalize their arguments. And if you happen to be Jewish, then they would have to invent another one, because being Jewish and anti-Semitic at the same time doesn't really work. So they would call you self-hating Jew. So this weapon has been used for decades. I think it's losing now its effectiveness, but for many decades they would use that, particularly in Western societies, because of the historical anti-Semitic trope that governments and people in the West have done, particularly during the Second World War, during the Holocaust era. And therefore, it was an effective tool that the Hasbara people would use in order to make sure that their argument will carry the day. But I think now a lot of people are seeing through this particular charge that being anti-Israel or being anti-Zionist or criticizing the policies of the state of Israel does not equate a person who's anti-Jewish. In fact, I argue that what we're trying to do here in exposing Israel and exposing Zionist encroachment and atrocities is to save Judaism from Zionism, because one of the greatest disservices that Zionism did, not just against the Palestinians and other communities, but also against the Jewish religion itself, because it has redefined Judaism from being one of the great revealed faiths and traditions, and it made it into a nationalist and ethnic concept. That today you say, if you are Jewish, then you must be pro-Israel. Otherwise, Judaism doesn't make any sense to them. So equating this, of course, is a great disservice to Judaism, because Zionism is nothing more than a colonial settler movement. Yes, its aim is to bring Jews, but that just happened to be the rallying cause in order to justify why they are taking over the land of Palestine. And therefore, our solution to this is not to denigrate or attack or hate Jews, because I think we could see today, particularly after October 7th, there are a great number of Jews who distance themselves from Israel, who criticize Israel, who reject Israeli claims and reject Israeli actions. We, in fact, in the Islamic faith, we have a very clear understanding of the nature, as again the Hasbara people would like to believe. Because in the Hasbara mind, if they can turn this into a religious war, then they will try to rally the Christians, particularly Christian Zionists, and hope that they can make use of the vast technological and industrial advancements of the West in trying to bring about this force against the quote unquote backward Muslims. And therefore, if they can bring this into a religious war, then hopefully, and from their standpoint, they can go and perhaps even bring about a messianic vision and apocalypse of some sort. But of course, as Muslims, we know that this is not how we look at the world. Islam actually recognizes Judaism and Christianity. We have no problem with them. They have problem with Islam because they don't recognize Islam as a revealed religion. Muslims believe that Judaism and Christianity are revealed religions, that they have special status, and that they are respected and they are recognized. And therefore, there is no religious war to start with. The conflict from an Islamic perspective is only against aggressors. We read that in Surah 60, verses 8 and 9, in which the verses says that God does not forbid people from acting justly to those who do not fight them in their religion and they do not expel them from their homes, but God will forbid people from dealing with these people who expel them from their home or fight them in their religion. In other words, it's about aggression. It's not about faith. And that's why we do not have a religious war from that standpoint. Doesn't mean that people do not rely on their faith and tradition and determination to fight injustice everywhere. That's different from considering this as a religious war. But again, they would like you to believe that this conflict was there for thousands of years and that Muslims are by nature anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic, and therefore the whole world should come to these victims of Islamic anti-Semitism. But the fact of the matter is, again, it goes back to the Jewish Encyclopedia, which says these Jews of Islam lived their golden age during the time when Jews lived under Islamic societies, that Muslims do not have this hatred, this hostility, this violent tendency against Jews the way that the Europeans had it for centuries inside Europe. And therefore, what we present here is we present a narrative that is completely different from what the Hasbara people are trying to present. Our solution to Palestine is that the rights of the Palestinians need to be restored, and that if Europe cannot tolerate or accept its Jewish populations, then we've done this before after 1492 when they were expelled from Spain, Islamic Spain, that they are welcome to settle in Muslim countries from Tangier in Morocco to Jakarta in Indonesia, but not at the expense of being a sovereign state or at the expense of taking anybody's rights, including Palestinians. They could come as immigrants if they cannot feel protected in their own societies. That's how Muslims dealt with them. But that's not the narrative you will hear from the Hasbara people, who are trying to justify their disposition of the Palestinian people, who try to justify the atrocities they committed, the genocide, the ethnic cleansing that have been taking place now for decades. So again, when we go back and look at the facts, you will find that there are a set of facts which are being manipulated and which are being changed and then more disinformation is added to it in order to bring about an Israeli narrative where that narrative is actually false. We have seen during this war, people are saying, as if the war started on October 7th, and these Israelis are victims, and they are just defending themselves. Farther from the truth. The fact of the matter is that the Palestinians have been, at the end of this conflict, at the thumb of the Israelis. They have been aggressed upon for decades, while the whole world is doing nothing about it. We've seen, for example, Netanyahu standing up 2 weeks, exactly 2 weeks, 15 days before October 7th, in which he was at the UN holding a map and drawing a line that started from India, going through the Gulf into the Arab Emirates, and from the United Arab Emirates to Saudi Arabia, to Jordan, and then to the port of Haifa, and from there to Europe, across the Mediterranean, and calling the whole land of Palestine as Israel, and basically telling the whole world, now we are in control. Now we are presenting to you Israel, which will be safe, secure. It's a greater Israel. There is no Palestine anymore, and we are going to make sure that this world will be prosperous under our control. What was happening in Palestinian territories in the meantime? Well, since the empowerment of his government at the end of 2022-23, we found that they started an aggressive policy of annexation of the West Bank. We see it today. This is what's happening in the West Bank today. They're trying to basically annex Area C, which is about 60% of the West Bank, after they devastated Gaza, because Israel had a problem. And even all the diaspora people couldn't deal with this problem. Israel, in 1993, when they went into the Oslo Accords, they were trying to shape the Palestinian conflict in a way that they could postpone any kind of resistance until they complete their plans. They never had that. They never had the intention, actually, giving Palestinians any rights, even though the official Palestinian organization, the PLO, recognized Israel in a so-called two-state solution. The fact of the matter, Israel never recognized anything except the PLO to represent the Palestinians, and then they throw it away and they brought a more client organ called the PA, the Palestinian Authority, and from there on they started annexing the West Bank bit by bit. The number of settlers increased from 115,000 into about 800,000 today. They don't call them settlers, they call them pioneers, because again, its whole notion is to change the narrative, is to change the perception. They don't call it occupied territories, it is disputed territories. So that's part of the diaspora, is to change the perception of the people. They don't call it the West Bank, it's Judea and Samaria. Going back to biblical names, that means it's ours, it's not yours. They don't say, we're going to initially take over the Al-Aqsa Mosque, but over time, they put facts on the ground. So today you say, we need to divide the time. You get your time, we get our time, until they take over. In the same tactic they use in the Hebron Mosque of the Ibrahimi Mosque, in which today, I remember I visited in 1983, the Jews would get 1 hour a day, and now it's the opposite. The Muslims who would get 10, 15 minutes for every prayer, they will close it, and then it's open for the Jews. So they took over completely the Ibrahimi Mosque. That's exactly what they're trying to do to the Aqsa Mosque. And Ibn Gavir doesn't even hide it. He say openly that we need to take over, we need to put the Israeli flag, we need to build our temple, and we need to take it over. So that's the idea. Now, on the eve of October 7th, the reality is Gaza has been under siege for 16 years. They have been denied everything that other people in the world have. They are completely under siege by the Israelis. The West Bank, it's under obviously occupation since 1967. We're talking about close to 57 by that time, 56, 57 years of occupation. We're talking about the incursion, daily incursion they started. They're trying to depopulate the Palestinians from different communities. They want to start with Area C, go all the way to Area A. They didn't even hide it. Smotrich, who is their finance minister, who is in charge of the West Bank, by the way, has said that the Palestinians really have three choices. One is that they need to be subjects within the Israeli state. They need to adhere and acknowledge that Israel is in control, that they have no political or civil rights. If they don't like it, they can get paid, they get some compensation and leave. And if they don't like it, they will be killed. This is not a new phenomena, by the way. Moshe Dayan, who was the one of the early founders of the Zionist state, who at one point was chief of staff, at one point he was defense minister, and then foreign minister, has said once that the Palestinians, if they want to live in Israel, they need to live, and I quote, like dogs. And if they don't like it, they need to leave. So that's the Zionist ideology. And incidentally, let's define what a Zionist is. A Zionist is any person who believes or acknowledges or recognizes any part of Palestine as that the Jewish communities have the right in any part of Palestine as a sovereign state or as a sovereign entity. Whoever believes that Israel has any part of Palestine or the whole of Palestine, that it should be under Jewish supremacy or Jewish sovereignty, is a Zionist. That Zionist could be Jewish, could be Christian, could be Muslim, could be Buddhist, could be Hindu, could be irreligious, could be anything. So it doesn't have to be Jewish. Of course, it happens that many Jews believe in this and they live in Palestine. These are Zionists, but there are Christian Zionists, and we also have Muslim Zionists. So we need to be aware of those who propagate and who basically talk about these things and with different names. We've seen a lot of them within the Arab and Muslim communities. They try to propagate Israeli propaganda, Israeli Hasbara. They bought the Israeli narrative for whatever reasons. I mean, some of them could be doing it because they believe in it, or others because they have other interests. It doesn't matter. These are Zionists, and they need to be confronted. And that Zionism is not just a danger. It's not just a danger for Palestinians. It's actually a danger for the whole world. I don't want to take, because I know that you have some questions, so I just want to conclude by saying that what happened since October 7th is that this whole Israeli project is starting to unravel. Israel had many strategic losses, even with all the tragedies that have taken place. We've seen, for example, the atrocities, the thousands of people that have been killed, the destruction of civil life in Gaza, the hospitals, the schools, the universities, the public places, the water desalination plants, the mosques, the churches, the electricity grids, every part of Gaza has been destroyed, because the idea for Israel is not actually even to avenge, even though they have declared that, but also to change the demographics, because they had a problem. They wanted to have greater Israel. They want to claim that Israel is, quote unquote, a democracy and it will have Jewish majority, but they had a problem because the number of Palestinians in historic Palestine, in British mandated Palestine, which is between the river and the sea, actually exceeds the number of Jews. So they would either have to admit that they are an apartheid state, since they have one group dominating the other with different laws, or they would have to ethnically cleanse the Palestinians. And what they found in October 7th is an opportunity. And again, as I said, when you look at October 7th, there are reasons. The war did not start on October 7th. Palestinians in Gaza were under siege. Palestinians in the West Bank were under daily incursions. The Hamas was being Judaized day by day. The people in prison, after Ben Gvir became in charge of the prison and the police, they have been living under intolerable conditions in which all the privileges, all the things that they gained, or the rights they gained in prison have been taken away from them. And you add all this up, and what you see here is that there will be an inevitable rebellion, an inevitable eruption, and that's what happened. It was a prison break. The people under prison, they broke out of that prison, and they did unbelievable things that Israelis never thought that the Palestinians were capable of doing. That's why the whole Zionist enterprise was being undermined. And they received strategic losses in terms of security, military, psychological, economic, media, legal, and the narrative, internal, political, and strategic. All these 10 areas, 10 fields, they have received strategic losses. As I said, for example, on the military, their military doctrine has been undermined because it was predicated on 6 principles. All of them were undermined on October 7th. Preemptive strikes, early warning systems, effective deterrence, strong defense, quick resolution, escalation dominance. Each one of them has been weakened or undermined. The psychological nature of this cannot be also underestimated. They did not, because of their arrogance and how they looked at others, did not believe that the Palestinians are capable actually of striking that hard at them and teaching them a lesson. On the economic side, billions of dollars have been lost. Thousands of companies have closed down. Massive economic losses. Investments are no longer coming. The boycott that has spread throughout the world. And then when you look at their narrative, that has crumbled since October 7th. Now, a lot of people are even wondering whether the Zionist enterprise is a sound project for Jewish suffering and of the past. This narrative has been also undermined because of the savagery and the massacres that have been committed internally. There's a lot of problems, as we know. Tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people who are in the reserve, now they became part of this killing machine. It's very difficult to transfer from here to there. And of course, that will impact society as a whole. Tens of thousands of people are under psychological problem, and they cannot get beyond it, because when you turn people into killing machines, it's not easy. Even though 95% of the Israeli people approve of what's happening, which tells you about the nature of Zionism and Zionist Zionist society. When you look at the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court, how they have basically indicted Israel, they have condemned its occupation, termed it an occupation, how its political leaders and military leaders are indicted for criminals. How this whole thing is being looked at as genocide throughout the world. These are huge gains and strategic losses that Israel has to do. Even on the political side, in the past, at best, people now and then they would talk about two-state solution. Now they start with a two-state solution. Even some people question whether the whole enterprise would even survive this, whether the whole thing of having this ethno-supremacist state is actually a state that is worth defending, despite the hypocrisy and the double standard of the West and how they have been trying to do it. And strategically, the United States wanted to confront China in Asia, and they wanted to give this region to Israel and Saudi Arabia to protect it and to protect its interests. Now this whole even normalization process is in jeopardy. Incidentally, had October 7th not happened, we would have had a normalization process between Saudi Arabia and Israel. This is a huge thing that would have probably been a huge strategic loss for the Palestinians because of the importance of Saudi Arabia as a land that has the two most sacred cities, Mecca and Medina. But let me tell you that Indonesia wasn't far behind. Had Saudi Arabia normalized, that would have extended to particularly Pakistan and Indonesia, which has been a huge problem because Indonesia is the largest Muslim country, and normalizing with Israel gives it the legitimacy that it should get, and therefore it would have been probably a huge blow to the Palestinians. So that's one of the strategic losses also that Israel is suffering. Just to conclude, I want to say a couple of things. One is that we should not look at this in a negative way. What happens, yes, we have suffered a lot. The Palestinians have suffered a lot. But the strategic losses of Israel that will speed up and accelerate the disintegration of the state, the collapse of the Zionist entity, the dismantlement of this is not far behind. This is the beginning of the end. because it has been exposed for what it is. Zionism is a violent project that wants to dominate this region and wants to use this notion that is no longer operable in this world, the settler, colonial, supremacist, racist ideology to impose its hegemony and control over the rest of the people is no longer accepted. It's no longer acceptable. The Palestinians have shown that they are willing to fight and resist, but we need also to remember the formula is very simple: to dismantle Zionism and the Zionist state and the Zionist structures, the racist structures. It cannot be done without the Palestinians, but also it cannot be done with Palestinians alone. Everyone is part of the struggle. Everyone needs to be part of that struggle from around the world. Palestine is becoming the symbol, the key, the compass, the scale which people could look at the conflict or the fight between truth and falsehood, between justice and injustice, between the forces of good and the forces of evil. We've seen this. This is the only issue, the only cause that can galvanize millions of people around the world. There is no other cause that can actually bring that in every major capital in the world, in which there are thousands, tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of people in the streets, basically calling for the end of the Zionist occupation and for the massacres and for the genocide and the ethnic cleansing that have been perpetrated by Israel. So this is an important point, and I think we need to move now beyond the description into action. That means everywhere, in every capital of the world, there has to be a group of people who can embrace this as a moment by which we can actually end this evil, end this experiment, this enterprise that Palestine can no longer tolerate having this regime, this Zionist regime, having this racist, supremacist regime. That needs to be dismantled. That is our goal. It's not to state and all that stuff. Zionism is no longer acceptable. Racist ideologies should no longer be tolerated or accepted. What we need to do is to do away with this. And we have seen what it means to be a Zionist: is to be violent, is to be a genocidal, and is to basically commit war crimes, and that should not be accepted. Thank you very much for listening, and if there are any questions, I'm open.
Inshallah. Yeah, Jazakallah khair. Thank you very much, Professor, for the very enlightening explanation. So I think we can open the question sessions if there is any. Maybe, okay, one question from the participants.
I see some hands raised.
Yeah, perhaps the one who raised the virtual hand here. Maybe we can unmute the microphone, Mr. Zakarabi.
Okay. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you so much, Professor, for the lecture. It's been very informative and educative. My question is, if the Hasbara project is supported by big money and big media companies, Hollywood, Washington, etc., with a systematic and organized narrative around the world, shouldn't there be an organized and systemic narrative from the Muslim side to fight their narrative, in particular within the global Muslim society itself? Because I believe many of us Muslims don't understand the importance of the issue just yet, and its relevance to our lives as an individual or in a family level. That's my first question. The second question is, if yes, if you think that there should be an organized and systemic narrative from the Muslim side, are we strong enough as one global ummah to create this organized and systemic narrative instead of sporadic movements? since many of the Muslim countries haven't even budged to help our brothers and sisters in Palestine? Or are sporadic movements the answer to fight their narrative? Thank you so much, Professor. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.
Thank you. I totally agree that the Hasbara attempt, by the way, Israel has its own Ministry of Strategic Affairs, and what it is, it's just a big organization that finances Hasbara, and it has its own organs throughout the world. They have thousands of websites, created websites, fake accounts on social media. And they do that all the time in a very systematic way. There is a whole unit within the Israeli military called Unit 8200. Part of its task, part of its job is to create these false narratives and to create the atmosphere or the narrative within social media. They try to attack others. They have all kinds of techniques. I didn't get through to explain, even though I wanted to, but because of the lack of time. But there is a lot of things going on, and we need to have a counter narrative, a counter groups. And as I say in other forums, that what we need to do is to create a global solidarity movement that will engage and will confront Zionists on all spheres and all aspects and all fields, including media. So this is only one part that we need to do. And that needs to be done in every society, not even just Muslim societies. We are now getting into the fifth phase of the struggle, which is the phase of global confrontation. In the past, used to be just Palestinian or Arab or Muslim and so on and so forth. Now we're in the phase where globally we need to confront Zionism. Zionism has proven that it has very, very powerful supporters and very powerful enablers in the US, Europe, and other places, including, as I said, even within the power structure and elites in Muslim societies. These all need to be confronted, and we need to do that in a very organized manner, in a very disciplined manner, having your own strategic plan, identifying all the sources of these Zionist tendencies and Zionist narratives, and try to confront them and try to inform and educate the people. So certainly, to answer your second question, are we strong enough? I think by over time, we will become strong enough. If you look at the resistance on the military field, what it was 20 years ago, what it is today, certainly there's a huge difference. But we need to start empowering ourselves in other fields, not just because this conflict will not just end militarily. We really need to start engaging and confronting Zionism in all spheres. Politically, diplomatically, economically, commercially, artistically, sports, legal, in legal circles and courts, in the media, culturally, educationally, academically, in every field we need to be there. We need to start thinking of those terms. In that case, then everyone is part of the struggle. It's no longer just a few people who are holding arms or this or that. Every single person needs to be a part of this struggle. This is the struggle that defines the future of the world, in my view, and that particularly in the Muslim world, because Israel cannot survive without having or becoming the hegemon of the region. Any attempt for civilizational advancement, for scientific progress, for economic prosperity, it will be fought by Israel, because this could be, the way they see it, an existential threat to them. We've seen that through the Arab Spring, how they looked at it negatively, and they were actively working to make sure it will be defeated, it will go away, and they aligned themselves with other interests in the region to make sure that doesn't happen. So the only way to do that is we need to confront them, and we need to confront them in all fields. And to do that, we need to be organized, we need to be disciplined, we need to be comprehensive, and we need to understand the nature of this and work very patiently until that objective is achieved.
Sure. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Professor.
Yeah, thank you, Sister Takarabi, for the question, and thank you also for Professor Sami for the explanation. And perhaps we can go to the next participant who want to ask directly to Professor. Is there any other participant who wants to ask directly?
There is, I see one hand, Sarah.
Sarah, okay, please, Sarah.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you for the explanation, Prof. I want to share a little experience. We know Hasbara is a challenge for us, especially those who are active on social media. And many of my friends have been followed by false information. Many comments are spread on social media. It is very difficult to distinguish between what is right and what is wrong. Yeah, and many of them ended up being confused by the large amount of information, and they decided to stay silent, to silent to speak out about Palestine. Yeah, because of many information. What do you think about that? It is right to keep silent because many people confused about the right or false information on social media.
Very good question. And I think people would tend to stay silent for possibly two main reasons. One is that they're not informed enough to respond, and they feel frustrated. And with that, we need to establish a rapid response teams, people who are well educated, well informed, who could immediately respond to these challenges, which are, by the way, sponsored by Hasbara organizations. And they just continue to flood social media with misinformation, with attacks, because they have different techniques that they use. First, they try to ignore, but once these they can no longer ignore them, they start flooding misinformation, changing the narrative, and of course, they try to also malign and attack the people that they think could be influencers. But there are other type of people who know the truth. They know what's right and what's wrong, but they just don't want to be involved in this because of the amount of agony that they would have to go and the amount of suffering. And that's the whole purpose of trying to malign these people. And you said there's a price to pay. There's a price to be exacted. Your reputation could be solid. Your job could be in jeopardy. Your whole future could actually become under scrutiny, and therefore, why you want to go through this suffering? You could also, if you are vocal enough, and you could be frozen out from social media. Your accounts could be deleted. There are all kinds of consequences that people may have to go through, and therefore, people, I don't want this. But that's the whole price that the Hasbara is trying to exact. The Hasbara notion is that you should not criticize Israel, and if you do, there is a price to pay. And so I tell these people, that particularly if they come from backgrounds in which they know that standing up for justice and standing up against the powerful has its own meaningful rewards, because life is not just about material things. Life is not just about living comfortably. Life is about how you can make a difference in the world. And when you stand up to the powerful and to the evil that the Zionist structures and the Zionist supporters are trying to promote, that by itself has its own rewards. It shows that you are capable of making a difference in this world. And this is not just, again, about Palestine. Palestine is just at the forefront of this. This is also about how this world would be shaped. We want a world where the powerful can simply kill the weak and get away with it. We want a world where you have these weapons of mass destruction being employed against defenseless civilians, against children and women, because certain group of people think they can get away with it. If we don't speak up, then that's the result. And if it happens today to the Palestinians and the Israelis and the Zionists get away with it, then it would happen tomorrow for someone else. So this is also about the future of humanity. This is about the future of the world. People should not allow other people to dominate, dispossess, kill, use genocide, ethnic cleansing to get their political aims. So this is about our future, everyone's future. And you cannot be silent when these things happen. And if you don't know, then we need to create teams that can educate the public at large.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor. Hope it can give good understanding for Sarah. Or is there any else?
Thank you, Mbak Tere. Maybe I have another question for Mr. Heru. May I ask?
I'm not
enggak.
sure
Okay.
about
It's okay.
Professor
Okay.
Heru. Okay.
Enough.
Thank you so much for your participation, Sister Sarah. So I think we come with the conclusion. At least we have to highlight about the Hasbara. However, it's just another form of apartheid ideology set by Zionism that very destructive for human life, especially what's happening in Palestine. If we just, got the wrong understanding about this, we cannot differentiate which one is the wrong ideology, which one is just a religion, because the Zionism can be Jewish, can be Christian, can be Muslim, even they no longer relate their religion with it. They just want to make sure that the agenda of Zionism can be established, and therefore we have to be very at least very very firm about this. And secondly, maybe I would like to emphasize this statement, Prof. The right to resist is protected by international law. So we have to take part. Everybody needs to take part to reclaim the narrative. So any one of us can do more from our own position, our own activities, like you said before, with the global solidarity movement. Start from the small theme to organize, comprehensive, until we can be like a very big movement can do together to crush this propaganda. And inshallah the time will be the key, and the persistence will be the key to us, so we can work together as one global society to fight back the Hasbara, to counter the narrative with the real humanity agenda, that no one is free until Palestine is free. Is that enough, Prof?
Yes, thank you so much.